Okay, so as you can see, we've got the cockpit installed. That's all in there nicely done now. No problems at all, just be careful where you line it up. It's a bit vague to say the least, and you might be able to see just down there, you've got a little L shape there. You would think that this would sit onto it, you'd be wrong. Your best way, to show you on this one, on the close-up, is to get in here. There's a little ridge there, and that's where the actual instrument panel sits into. Sit it in there and it lines up. The easiest way, of course, is just to make sure that you've got the underside in this wheel well all covered, because if it's not covered, all types of trouble, because obviously it'll be too forward, too back, and then obviously we'll have trouble with this area at the top lining up with the clear part as well. The other thing we've done at the same time, what I've actually done is put in the clear windows. Now the clear parts, to be honest, slightly disappointed. It seems to be okay on the main one. I haven't got too many of them, but it's like there's hairs running round on the actual, in the plastic. You can't polish them out. I've tried to polish them out, but they're just there. But they're just a tad annoying. It's obviously something to do with the injection moulding process, which I'm not a chemist by any way, and I wouldn't have a clue about. So anyway, I've put these in. Now, if you're using acrylics, like we were doing with this, what happens is we'll come along later and we'll give them a bit of a clean by scraping them off and a bit of a polish up once it's all painted and all done. No problem. If you're using an enamels, obviously we're going to mask these. Two ways of doing it. You can use a little bit of mask oil, something like that, which is like a rubbery substance that you just paint on, it dries and away you go. Or you can actually just cut some little masks for it and put them on. So no problem with that at all. As you can see as well, we've painted the underside black for these two halves going together. He says, right, okay, big thing with this type of aircraft, it's going to be a tail sitter. If you're new to all this, tail sitting basically means as you build all your model on the undercarriage and it's clunk, it hits at the back. Because this is a plastic model, obviously, you know, in real life you've got heavy engines, obviously the crew stations, electronics, there's not a lot going along in the tail and the frisbee on the roof and things like that. Reality says that frisbee on the back is a very heavy weight, it's going to be pushing the back of this down. The tail section itself is extremely large, and obviously with the tail fins as well, it's a lot of weight. So what happens is you put this on and it goes clonk. If you've seen me do the resin one, you'll understand how much weight that needed to the front, and it still wasn't enough. So this one, I'm not taking any chances. The instructions call out for 50 grams. I've actually got 75 here because I'm not taking any chances with this. You won't have any trouble with the undercarriage. Don't worry about things about obviously weight with the undercarriage. You know, they're pretty chunky sets of undercarriage, should be okay. So fixing these in, the way I do it, you just take a bit of super glue like this, okay, and then all we're going to do, we're just going to come in and we're just going to put a drop of super glue, quite a generous bit, okay, and then in here we've got our first lead part, and that will just sit in there like that, okay, and we're just going to pop some more glue in the bottom bit here, and we've got a second smaller one, right, that's going to fit, hopefully, just in here like that. There we go. And then what we do, just to make sure they're all hold together, we're going to put a drop of super glue on there like that. Come along with some kicker, just to help weld all that in. And what that basically stops is, in a minute I'm going to turn this over, and if you hadn't used the kicker, and being impatient like I am, you turn it over and obviously all the super glue runs out, you get it all over your hands, and next thing you know you've got glue marks all over your model. So it's just a little thing just to, you know, sort of make sure you don't have any troubles with that going everywhere. Don't worry about it touching your other paint and things like that, because the kicker, if you're using this particular one, this is the vital one, it dries completely clear no matter what it's over. So we just give that a blow. We're just going to check to make sure the fuselage halves go together. Obviously, you know, with those lead sections in there. So we're all happy. It's all going to go together. We're not have to worry about, obviously, it not going. To be making sure, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to put another lump of it right in the back here. Just to make sure, because I have been stung by this before, where I've come along, literally tried to fit it, and then all types of problems. So we're going to do just a bit of super glue there. Bit of kicker. Now if you are being very, very good, I should say, a good modeler, what you can also do is get a little bit of clear PVA glue, and give it a bit of it around it. The reason for using PVA glue, if your model is going to last a long time, and let's face it, we all hope they are, over time I have found in the past that CA glue does tend to sort of, it loses its grip, its bond, it goes powdery, and before you know it you can have a rattly thing going around, and if one of these lead weights gets to the rear, it'll be a tail sitter forevermore. So if you want it to be perfect, and I have done it in the past, I'll come along and I'll just put a little bit of super glue. It's not so bad in the front, but it just stops things rattling around, and it's just like a bit of a fail safe. So those two halves together, obviously we're not going to worry about, if you're following the instructions, the other steps, they'll go together fine. At the back here, make sure you've cut down the ejector pin marks, because they are rather high at the back and they can be a bit of a problem and sticking forward. But this is one of those things. What we're going to do, we're going to bring these halves together now for a sort of test fitting, making sure we're all going to go together okay. And we seem to have a bit of an issue on the underside, to be honest, which it may be one of these little lead parts is not playing ball, so we're just going to stick the front end in first. I think what it is, that little L shape at the front is just sticking up, so what we're going to do is just simply snip that out, just so it makes a little bit of a better fit, and I'm hoping then this will just, there we go, that cured the problem. Okay, so we have a look down, see how it pushes together right the way through. Doesn't seem to be too much of a problem how it all sits. It's just a case of getting these ejector pin marks, the pin marks to line up. Okay, when we're doing obviously models of this size, it's very big, it's well worth now taking your time. Don't rush ahead, sand, polish it, put it down, start getting paint on. They're big seams, these ones, and they're going to be extremely noticeable. So what I would say to you, in a moment we're going to do the usual things. We'll get all this thing strapped together, we're going to glue it, let the glue dry for a couple of hours, then we're going to come in and fill and sand as is required. But basically you do tend to get a little bit of shrinkage. By shrinkage, what actually happens is the glue you put down on the joints, because it actually melts the plastic, actually sort of pulls in over time. As it dries again, it shrinks back and you get a little bit of shrinkage. So it's well worth taking your time at this point to get that seam right. The same with the Cockpit one, which we'll go through in a moment. But if you get them right, it will save a lot of time a bit later on, perhaps when you have to come back and you think, oh, it hasn't done it quite as well as I was hoping, and things like that. So that's that. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to check out, make sure we've got everything we needed to do on the inside. We're making sure we've opened up all the holes we've needed to, having a look at the plans over here, and we've done everything we want. We've got the ballast in, we're all happy how it all is, the door, everything else we can do afterwards. So what we're going to do, we're just going to generally start gluing this together. So we're just going to start at the back here, running down, because it's quite a nice fit. Generous amounts of glue, because this is going to need a little bit of work. So by generous, I really mean generous. Okay. This down here on the underside, you might be able to see if the close-up cuts in. There we go. Down here we've got a seam, which obviously we don't have to take care of, because on the underside we've got a belly plate. So what we can do, just to help hold this all together, we're just going to put a drop of super glue right down the middle of that. Okay. A squirt of kicker. And that'll just lock up that bottom area, so we don't have to worry about that too much. So we just give that a bit of a mosey around. If we get a cocktail stick in here, we should be able to just drag this forward. I'm hoping to. There we go. That's great. So obviously down here we don't have to worry too much about the under bit. So the underside, we're just going to run along. A lot of this is capillary action, we're just going to literally touch and let it flow. So we've got some little lumps and bumps under here. These are for the aerials, for the various sensors on the Hawkeye on the bottom. It has quite a few underneath. Okay, so we're just going to come along. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a drop of super glue in this front edge up here. Because when we can sand that out, but I want it to be and that can take care of those. Okay, so we're just working our way to the rear, making sure it's as lined up as we can get it. As I say, I'm not too worried about it because we're going to come back and sand and fill and various things as is required as we work our way around this. So it's quite a straightforward process. Unfortunately, it's one of those areas where it's just a case of whacking down your glue. It's not a nice crisp fit, perhaps, as we'd say with other kit manufacturers, but it gets us our Hawkeye, and that's what we're after. Okay, so we just hold this together just a second. So what we can actually do, we can get some spring-loaded clamps. I have got my lovely pegs somewhere, which we'll just get out. My little rubber pegs, it's probably better than that. As I say, be pretty generous with the glue because this is quite a big scene, so it can cause problems. Okay, so that's that one around. Now what we've got here are these bigger clamps, various sizes. The only drawback to them is they do tend to twist off, if I'm honest, but they're great for this type of thing. So we'll just get 2 on there. Okay, then the last bit we got just down here, the cockpit area, I will deal with once this is all dried up and looking good. If you have got rubber bands, you can use rubber bands as well, is another nice little touch. Okay, so we just got the area at the rear. Okay, so we just got this nose area now, so we're going to try and make this as nice as possible. There again, I'm not that worried about it. We can just get in here with some filler and some sanding as is required, because we're going to have to blend the nose slightly in on this one. So what we're going to do, we're just going to pop a little bit of super glue just down into this front area. A bit of a kick, hold that in place. And it's one of those things, this is where we're just going to fiddle it around. I'm not really worried about the fingerprints and all that at the moment. I'm really just trying to get this together. So by using a little bit of super glue, it works a bit like tacking stitches, you know, in your sewing. You just sort of tack it loosely into position, and then you can come around afterwards to make it a better fit. And as I say, this nose is going to be somewhat of an issue to get all this in, I feel. So what we'll do, we're just going to do the same thing again, touch of super glue. So we just let this kick in. So obviously all with kicker, if you put a big spot on there, just give it a minute to work and get in before you release. Because even though it's dry on the top, it's soft on the inside, and just it takes time to work its way through. But what we'll do is we'll just sand that off afterwards. But there we go, that holds that nose in quite nicely. Peg off the back, just stick that back on. And there we go, I'm quite happy how that all is. So this is one of those things that say load more glue, let that dry for a good couple of hours. make sure you've got plenty of glue absolutely everywhere. Okay, so we're going to leave that to one side to completely dry off, and that's that bit done. As I say, a lot of bit of work to do with that, but we will come back to it to sort that out properly. Now, the next thing up is I've already got cut out here. He says with a little bit of super glue on his hand, so we'll just get rid of that. Okay, wing section. There again, be careful how you cut it out and you do your bits and pieces with it, because obviously you don't want to take too much away, otherwise you're going to make big seams and things like that. Pretty straightforward. Got two halves of it, just down at the back. There we go, plenty of glue. This is a great thing for this. Nice big areas to work with. So we'll just get that down in there like so. We do one wing half, then we can move over to the other half, and then what we'll do, obviously we'll sand and take care of this properly. Okay, so that's those bits done. We can leave that off to one side to dry and then take care of it later. Now, the other thing at this point it calls out for is the major flap that goes on the back of the engine. Immediately, when you try and dry fit these together, you sort of come along and you think, oh, that's okay, we'll go in there and we're away. But unfortunately, it just doesn't feel right, it doesn't sit right, and things like that. So what you need to do is just down in here, if you can see on the close-up, you've got ejector pin mark here, 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 and here. So what you need to do is quickly just sand them off. So you just get your sanding stick up to the back of the little activator and just sand them off and out of the way, and you'll be surprised how nicely it will sit down. It is the thing with the kit, there is the odd little ejector pin mark which is slightly raised on one side, so you just need to pop along and just sand them down, just knock that off of it, just like that. Okay, there's another one at the back here that it makes a little lip, and you can probably see it, it's stamped into the, unfortunately, the actual part that you're going to see as well, so that'll be a filler job in a few minutes. So we'll just pop along like that. Okay, check the underside, there's not any major ones there, so there again, we'll just come along, dry fit them together. Absolutely no problem, goes together, but unfortunately we've got large lumps and knocks and everything around. So what we'll do is just pop along with some super glue, with some extra thin, and then I'll show you a little trick in a moment about using super glue as a filler. On something small like that we can do this. So we just hold that a sec, just to get that to bite a little bit. On there we can probably pinch a peg for a moment. Okay, and we're just going to pop along this rear part. Just like so. And let the capillary action all flow underneath. Now, as you might be able to see here, we've got a nasty mark. Quite frankly, it's a horrible little pin mark. So we'll just pop some glue along here. Now, if you've got a little joint like this, obviously you could now come along with your filler, you get out your squadron or whatever your flavour of filler you like, pop along, fill it all out, then go and wait an hour for it to dry off. If you've got something quite a small little area, what you can actually do is what I like to do. If I just get a piece of tape here, just to protect my work surface, otherwise I end up with glue spots everywhere. Okay, so we just pop it down here. What I do, get some glue, pop along, make a spot. Okay, then actually just come along, and then with this one we've got here, we've just got it, we're just going to tap and let it naturally flow along that little seam that we've made. So we just, now this one down here, it's like a ribbed effect. We can actually put that back in with a blade afterwards. So obviously we've got a nasty gap running along the top there as well, as you can probably see. So plenty of super glue. Just along, fill them up. Same thing, kicker again, come along with your kicker, give you a bit of squirt, and all that does is speed it up. If you haven't got a kicker, don't worry about it, because obviously it'll just do exactly the same thing, just take a little bit longer. And just to speed things up a little bit, we're just going to pop a little bit on the back here. And hopefully they'll won't take long to dry. Okay, so naturally there again, let that dry. Sometimes you might have to come back with a little bit more. And in true style, I've got one I did earlier. Just dry that down. This one was done just literally just a second ago. Quite a coarse file to start with, keeping it flat. All we're going to do is pop along and sand it all off. Now we're not looking for a miracle filler job by using super glue. It won't be as smooth and as nice as you would get it certainly if you're using filler and sort of Mr. Surfacer and things like that. But for a quick, rapid filler job that you can sand and get on with straight away, then it is a very good one to do. So we just sand that down. The other thing you can do with it if you wanted to is just to add a little bit of talcum powder or flour with it, and what that'll do is just makes it slightly easier to sand because it's got that in amongst it. So let's just give them a quick file like that. But it's just a fast way to do little annoying gaps than it would be to have to wait for filler to dry. And obviously you can move your build on. Obviously that was quite a coarse file for doing that, and then obviously you can come along with your a normal type of working file if you like, to tidy it all up, all the areas a little bit better, just like that. And if you have got any little holes still left over, you can take care of those in a moment. So what we do, we just pop around and just polishing it up, and really all we're doing with this file is getting rid of the major gouges that were caused by using a very coarse file. So this will just smooth it all in. And then what I've got here is one of my favourite files and sanders, which I tend to use a lot for everything. It's called a Miracle Shiner, made by Mastercasters, but it's great for polishing up your work ready for paintwork afterwards or fillers. But it gets away all the scratches and imperfections and just brings you back to being nice plastic again. It's a nice big file as well, so you can cover big areas, and it's shaped quite nicely for doing little areas as well. So there we go, that's that one in there. That just gets rid of all those scratches. And there we go, you can probably see, or you might be able to see, there is some marks, but what it is, it's actually the super glue's filled it. They're just little marks made by the super glue being clear and solid. So what we do those, and then in a moment we're going to come along once we've got all the major components together with Mr. Surfacer and put them all over just to check the seams and that we're happy with how it's all laid out and how it's gone. So there we go, that's that one done. And then obviously that fits us onto there in a moment. The next big thing, and to be honest is the the problem area of the kit, is this little thing, which is the engine nauticals. Now these engine nauticals, I'll just move this out of the way, we won't be sticking ourselves to it. There we go, these engine nauticals don't go together very well at all, to be honest. They're a bit of a pain, so it's one of those areas where you just really have to bite the bullet and get on with it. No amount really of dry fitting and everything else really works. Obviously it will help out with it, but it's certainly, it's one of those areas where you just have to get in there and get on with it. So what I'm going to do, I'll show you the way I've been doing it and give you quite an in-depth run through on doing it. Basically I've got all the parts here cleaned up already. I'll just bring those all in here. Okay, various items. The side panels, which let me get your numbers for you, which are H15, H17, 14 on the other side as well. Obviously check your references for your particular type. This one's got the little lip running around the outside of it, and the Hawkeyes that I've seen, reference photo here, really it just shows it with this particular type of panel on it, so that's why I've gone for it. But obviously with the instructions they're a bit vague to which is which, and it doesn't really mention it. The part itself, the major parts themselves are obviously we've got in here, you've got an ejector pin mark just down here, which is right here, which you can sand out quite easily. That one's not too much of a problem, so we just get rid of that one. Just shallow it out. You've got another one back here which is a bit more of a problem because it's very hard to get into, but there again you just sort of take your time, you can sand that one out, or certainly reduce its depth a little bit by a bit of priming like this. Okay, I'll finish those off later, but what you actually do once you've got those, you can then come along and we've got the major floor part to this, which is going to stick in right here. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll just glue this in for a moment. There again, there's a few ejector pin marks all over these, so it's a case of have a look round, see which ones you want to take care of, which ones you don't. Obviously you're not going to see a great deal up inside these wells once they're done, but unfortunately there is a couple of nasty ones. I did take out a few of the really deep ones on this, just to make it a little bit nicer. Okay, that one goes together, pretty simple. Okay, next up, the way I do it anyway, is you've got the two intake halves, which are quite a tricky thing to get because they don't like to fit together and all the rest of it. So get your teeth on there and bite them together, or you could use other things. Okay, get some glue on them. Okay, and what that'll do, it'll soften down the little problem areas of why they aren't going together, which is a tiny little ejector pin mark in there. Okay, and once they are, you can squeeze the life out of it and hold them together and get them just like so. Okay, then the way I did it, I've got a couple of clamps, spring loaded ones, lift one off here and the one off of there. Okay, and we can get them together. Whilst that's just drying off a sec, you've got a couple of other little things. You've got the exhaust at the back, so what we do, we just drop a glue down the back and sit him in. Obviously you could paint all these as separate if you wanted to. I'm going to go around and do them all as a whole afterwards. But if you wanted to do it now, you could go around and take care of those. Now the gear itself, which is a little bit of a funny way of doing it all, you've actually got so it can install directly into it, and then you build a kit around it. As you might have seen a lot of aircraft, obviously the way I do it, I tend to put the gear in afterwards for the sake of a couple of little pegs which aren't exactly brilliant and strong anyway. What I'm going to do, we'll install it all afterwards. So we'll paint and make the gear and we'll install it, but it does say in the instructions, and it calls out for it in stage 4, to basically put it all together before you get going. But as I say, we'll bypass that little problem. So what we'll do, we'll just pop it together. So you've got the main oleo area as well, and there's a massive great pin mark in there, and to be honest I've already sanded that one out, but you need to get rid of that one because it's very noticeable, because if you do look around the gear area, it's a very, very deep one. So what we do, we just put a bit of glue in there. Top part of the undercarriage, which if I remember rightly, or it says looking at it, is doesn't actually say the part number, which is very clever, H33. Okay, there does appear to be a front and back to it, although for the life of me I can't imagine what the difference is. Okay, so we're just going to get the other half in. Now at this point normally you would put this part here, which is the back arm to it, in there, but there again, because we're not sure how it's going to line up, I'm going to fit that afterwards, which will go in there with a nice dob of super glue once we're all in and fitted. So what we're going to do for the moment is get these two halves in together. Same thing as the other one. It's a bit of a pain getting it to squish. The way I found the best way is plenty of glue, plenty of time to let it harden up afterwards, and that'll make for a very nice strong. But what we're going to do is look straight down at it, and as you can see at the moment it's not square. You need it to be square to your undercarriage. Get that one in, and then you can just come along and squash these two halves together to make them a little bit more, but as I say, just remember to have it all sitting squarely. So look straight down at it, and you want obviously this top bar to be the same as the wheel itself. Otherwise what will happen is you're going to put it in, it's going to be at a slight angle, and your gear is going to be either pigeon toeing in or pushing out. So there we go, that's that one on. And what we do, we just leave that to one side to dry. Don't worry about the gear and the undercarriage, the wheels at the moment. That's something we'll come on to in a moment once it's all done. Now this exhaust pipe system, which might be sort of dry by now, you've got a little fan blade, which is what you'll see, obviously the compressor blade at the front, that just sticks in the back. So we just glue that as well. Get all those glued in and seated. A little bit just around here. You might be noticing the theme with this kit is lots of glue. It's one of those ones, it's not as crisp and as sharp perhaps as some of the recent builds we've been doing. You couldn't compare this certainly to anything Tammy's brought out recently, but at the end of the day it's a Hawkeye, it's in the right scale, and at the end of the day, as we've been saying recently, we're into model making. Really it's modelling and not construction. Okay, construction's where you put things together, which have been made fantastically, so-called like flat pack furniture. This one we're a little bit more creative, so we just have to fix any little problems and little areas that don't fit particularly well, this being one of them. Okay, so we've got that in. What I would recommend as well, there's a couple of locating tabs for putting these engines, this intake in, is removing one side of them. So if you're going to be using a side of the intake, perhaps like we're going to be doing this one, which is the left-hand side or the port side of the engine, sticking all the parts to it. So then when you come along with the starboard side of the engine, it just clamps all to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove some of the locating tabs, just sand them quickly off with a strong file, because it would be a nightmare trying to line it up both halves together as I found doing the others. So what we'd do, we're just going to drop a glue each of those, and we're just going to put these in. Now if you haven't got it in yet, whoops, and you've got your two halves together, don't worry about it, you can put it in afterwards, as I found out on a previous build of this one. It fits quite nicely afterwards as it does before. Okay, so that's those in. So don't worry about the gear, everything else. The only other thing you do have to worry about is when you come along in a moment, we're going to fit the front end in as well, is to actually fit the spinner prop on as well. Otherwise what happens is you can't put it on once it's all together. Well, you can, but it's a very much a nightmare, as I found out as well. So what we do, we're just going to fit all those in. Okay, and then what we'll do, it's all rather wet at the moment, I'm just going to flip this over and we'll just have a look to see how it's all sitting and how it's fitting. Now, as I said, I've tried numerous attempts at putting these in different ways of gluing first and dry brushing, dry fitting and things like that, but really at the end of the day I found the best way to do these is just plenty of glue, get it roughly all in position, and then I'll show you in a moment we'll do a tidy up job. So there we go, that engine exhaust has already come off, so we'll just leave that off a minute. Okay, so what we're going to do is just make a neat or neatish job of putting this front part of the engine on. As I said, it's nothing like you would hope for, and it's one of those ones where you'll be coming out with your various fillers and that afterwards. So we're just going to put a little bit of extra glue around just to get that one in place. You might also notice on the front of these there's a bit of bad moulding, and that's something else we'll take care of that in a minute because it is quite noticeable, so we'll get rid of that. Okay, that exhaust is out the way. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a drop of super glue down in here just to speed this up so I can show and hold you at the same time. Okay, let's get that engine in place. And there we go, that's all in. So what we're going to do from the top here, on the close up, we're just going to come in from the top, plenty of glue from the bottom, and then obviously we're just going to put a little bit more glue in through the front to really tidy that all up and to make it somewhat of a seamless join between the actual engine going in, and what happens is you'll see it go through. But as I say, this bit of the part is so far at the top. Now if you wanted to, you could go along, obviously paint these as separate and put them all together, but to be honest, because it's a handful to get this thing in, you tend to end up destroying all that nice work you did in the meantime. This little guy down here, which is a little cooler one for the inflow exit, we'll put that one afterwards, don't worry about that for the moment. So you're quite happy with how it all is, okay? Normally you'd let this dry and everything else, but we'll just push through. Okay, we're just going to pop the back halves together, and we'll just pinch a peg and stick that on, and then very gingerly we're just going to try and walk the engine sides together. Okay, and to be honest, and if I'm honest, this is the best one I've done to date. A few little clicks is always a good sign. Okay, so we're roughly together, so what we're going to do, we're just going to glue the other inside of that top of the well, gear well together, and we're going to glue along the top just to get this all together and all holding and starting to work. There again, in a moment, as you'll see, there's a few more problems left with this. We're not totally out of the woods yet, and the biggest problem is yet to come. Okay, so we're just going to pop some glue in all the right areas, all around, absolutely everywhere. Okay. Lots of it, and then will be one of those things which let it sit to do its own bit. Okay, we're all happy how that is sitting, and to be honest, as I'm saying, this is the best one I've done yet. All the others have been a nightmare to go together, but that one actually fell together quite nicely. So there we go. Happy with how that's gone. Okay, we're going to let that dry off just for about half an hour, and then we'll come back and I'll show you about fitting these side panels on, which are a bit of a handful.